Welcome back to this episode of this mini-series. Morning came to Alaigbo, but it did not feel like morning. The air was heavy, thick with unspoken questions. Even the palace walls seemed to have aged overnight, their stone surfaces looking more brittle. Inside, the grand throne room, once a symbol of absolute authority, now smelled of cracked power and lingering fear. Word had spread through the kingdom like a harmattan wind, carried on whispers from the market stalls to the quiet village squares. The king broke the mirror. Some said it with dread, others with a sliver of hope. The curse is gone, another would counter, and the most shocking rumor of all, the slave girl still lives. Nothing. Frightens elders like change they did not approve, and a storm of tradition was gathering. The chiefs, the guardians of the old ways, summoned King Uche, but this was not a summons for their ruler. It was a call for a son who had disobeyed his fathers. The message was clear, he was being judged. Onome, the reason for this turmoil, was barred from the council. This matter is for blood and crown, not beauty, they declared, their voices like stone grinding against stone. But walls have ears, and so do pillars. Onome hid behind one of the massive stone columns of the throne room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, listening to the fate of her king and her own being decided. The trial began. Chief Nwankwo, his face a mask of stern tradition, spoke first, his voice echoing in the tense silence. "You broke the covenant that gave your father power," he accused, his gaze sharp. "You chose a slave over Alaigbo." A low murmur of agreement trickled through the assembled chiefs. They saw Uche's act not as one of love, but of betrayal, a betrayal of their history, their power, and their gods. King Uche stood slowly. He was no longer the imposing, thunderous monarch they had always known. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, stripped of its royal boom. It sounded like truth. "That covenant gave us fear, not strength," he said, meeting their hard stares. "It fed on silence and obedience. If a throne survives only by destroying love, then it is already dead." The room fell absolutely quiet. No king had ever spoken like that. They had commanded, they had threatened, they had ruled. They had never questioned the very foundation of their rule. The chiefs, momentarily stunned, quickly regained their composure. They saw only one path back to order. They gave him a choice, a final, cruel bargain. "Kill the girl publicly," Chief Nwankwo demanded, "and we will cleanse the land of this sacrilege. Your throne will be secure." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "Or," he continued, "step down from the throne, abdicate, let Alaigbo return to the old ways, to a king who understands duty." Power was offering its final, terrible price, his love or his crown. Before Uche could even form a response, a figure emerged from behind the pillars. It was Onome. A collective gasp filled the hall. A slave girl, a woman, had dared to enter a sacred council of chiefs uninvited. It was an act of unthinkable defiance. She walked to the center of the room and knelt, not in submission, but with a profound respect that silenced them all. She lifted her head, her eyes clear and unwavering. "If Alaigbo needs blood to stand," she said, her voice steady, "let it be mine." King Uche turned sharply, his face a canvas of shock and horror. "No," he choked out, the single word filled with a universe of pain. Onome looked at him, a soft, sad smile on her lips. "I was a slave," she said, her voice now carrying through the hall. "I was owned. I was afraid every day of my life." She held his gaze. "But you saw me. You saw a person, not a possession. If my life ending can end the fear in this kingdom, then I give it freely." The chiefs hesitated. There was something in her voice, a strange power in her willingness to sacrifice, that disturbed the very core of their beliefs. And then, as if the land itself was responding, the ground shook lightly. It wasn't a violent earthquake, just a deep, steady tremor, like the slow, powerful beat of a giant heart. Through the high windows of the throne room, they saw it happen. The old, decaying shrine to the mirror god, which had stood for generations just outside the palace, collapsed in a cloud of dust. It crumbled on its own. There was no storm, no wind, no human hand to push it. It simply fell, as if its time was over. The elders froze. They were men who understood signs, who read the will of the spirits in the rustle of leaves and the flight of birds. This was a sign they could not ignore. The ancient symbol of their fear had fallen. Chief Nwankwo, his face pale, swallowed hard, perhaps He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Perhaps the spirits have moved on. The other chiefs, their certainty shattered, began to withdraw. They needed time. Tradition does not surrender loudly. It retreats into the shadows to reconsider. That night, King Uche did something no king had ever done. He gathered the people of Alaigbo in the great square. He stood before them not on a raised platform, but on the same ground they stood on. For the first time he stood without his royal guards. He was not a king protected from his people. He was a man among them. "I will no longer rule by fear," he announced, his voice carrying in the cool night air. "I will rule by consent. Your voices will shape our future." He took a deep breath. "And if Alaigbo rejects me, if you decide you want the old ways back, I will walk away from this throne." A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, but it wasn't the sound of anger. It was the sound of confusion, of shock, of a new and frightening idea taking root. They had been ruled, commanded, and led. They had never been asked. The throne of Alaigbo stood undecided, its future hanging in the balance. The people, so long silent, were awakening to a power they never knew they had. And as Onome watched the man she loved place his crown in the hands of his people, she realized something terrifying. Love had saved the king from a curse, but that same love might now destroy the crown itself. What will the people choose? What is the final fate of King Uche? And will Onome become a queen or a legend? The answer awaits in the final chapter. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the conclusion to this epic story. Thanks for watching.